Well, folks, remember 2016? The year of Brexit, the dabbing craze, and oh yeah, that whole Donald Trump becoming president of the United States thing. It's safe to say the world wasn't quite ready for a Trump presidency. It was like finding a Cheeto in your cereal bowl, unexpected orange, and a little bit concerning. From the bustling streets of Mumbai to the halls of power in Beijing, everyone was trying to figure out what a Trump administration meant for them. India, a rising economic powerhouse, wondered about the future of trade and its large diaspora in the US. China, the emerging superpower, braced itself for potential confrontations on trade and security. The world held its breath. Nobody, not even the most seasoned political analysts, could predict the roller coaster ride that was about to begin. This wasn't just another transfer of power, it was a seismic shift in the global landscape. And frankly, after the dumpster fire that was 2020, 2016 feels like a picnic where the only thing on fire was the potato salad. All right, let's break down Trump's governing philosophy. It can be summed up in two words: America first. Now, on the surface, putting your own country first doesn't sound so bad. It's like putting on your own oxygen mask before helping others on a plane. But Trump's version of America first was less about oxygen masks and more about building metaphorical walls, both literally and figuratively. It was a sharp turn away from decades of U.S. foreign policy that emphasized global engagement and multilateralism. Trump questioned long-held alliances, cozied up to dictators, and generally threw the global order into a state of delightful chaos. Think of it like this. Imagine you're at a dinner party, and Trump is the guy who shows up in a bathrobe, eats all the shrimp, and then tries to start a conga line. It was unconventional, to say the least. And while some might argue that he shook things up in a good way, others would say he just made a mess and left everyone else to clean it up. One of the biggest casualties of Trump's America First agenda was free trade. Trump saw trade deficits as a sign of weakness, like America was getting swindled at a giant yard sale. His solution? Tariffs, baby. Lots and lots of tariffs. He slapped tariffs on goods from China, Mexico, the European Union, basically anyone who looked at him sideways. Now, tariffs might sound boring, but they're basically taxes on imported goods, which means American consumers and businesses ended up paying more for everything from washing machines to steel. Trump argued that these tariffs would protect American jobs and force other countries to play fair. But critics argued that they actually hurt American businesses, raised prices for consumers, and sparked a global trade war. It was like watching a food fight break out in a fancy restaurant. Sure, it might be entertaining for a minute, but in the end, everyone's covered in soup, and nobody gets dessert. Immigration was another hot-button issue where Trump promised to shake things up. He famously vowed to build a big, beautiful wall along the US-Mexico border and make Mexico pay for it. Spoiler alert, they didn't. He also implemented a travel ban on citizens from several Muslim-majority countries, separated migrant children from their families at the border, and made it more difficult for people to seek asylum in the US. His supporters argued that these measures were necessary to protect national security and prevent illegal immigration, but opponents saw them as cruel, inhumane, and discriminatory. The whole thing was like trying to solve a leaky faucet by hitting it with a hammer. It might make a lot of noise, but it's not going to fix the problem, and it might just make things worse. Section 5. Upending foreign policy. Trump's approach to foreign policy was, to put it mildly, unconventional. He cozied up to dictators like Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un, withdrew the U.S. from international agreements like the Paris Climate Accord and the Iran nuclear deal, and generally seemed to prefer bilateral deals to multilateral cooperation. He questioned the value of NATO, threatened to pull out of the World Trade Organization, and moved the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, a move that infuriated Palestinians and angered many U.S. allies. It was like watching someone try to play chess by throwing the pieces at the board. There was a lot of movement, a lot of noise, but no clear strategy or endgame. Section 6, India's Balancing Act. So, how did India fare during the Trump era? Well, it was a bit of a mixed bag.
On the one hand, Trump and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi seemed to get along personally. They held rallies together, praised each other publicly, and generally seemed to have a good rapport.
But on the other hand, there were some major points of friction, particularly on trade. Trump repeatedly criticized India's trade practices, calling it the tariff king and imposing tariffs on Indian goods.
India retaliated with tariffs of its own, and the two countries were locked in a trade war for much of Trump's presidency. Trump also made it more difficult for Indians to work in the US on H-1B visas, a move that was unpopular with the Indian tech industry.
On the security front, the US and India continued to cooperate on counterterrorism and defense, but there were some disagreements over Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Overall, India seemed to be trying to walk a tightrope during the Trump years, trying to maintain good relations with the US while also standing up for its own interests.
Section 7. The Dragon and the Eagle. China. The relationship between the US and China under Trump was tense, to say the least. It was like watching a tennis match between two guys who really hate each other. There were some impressive shots, but mostly it was just a lot of grunting and sweating and passive-aggressive glares.
Trump launched a trade war with China, slapping tariffs on billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods. He accused China of unfair trade practices, intellectual property theft, and currency manipulation. China, of course, denied these accusations and retaliated with tariffs of its own. The trade war dragged on for years, hurting businesses and consumers in both countries.
But it wasn't just about trade. Trump also took a hard line on China's military expansion in the South China Sea, increased arms sales to Taiwan, and criticized China's human rights record. The two countries clashed on everything from climate change to North Korea. It was a relationship defined by suspicion, rivalry, and the constant threat of escalation. Section 8. Ripples on global waters. Trump's presidency wasn't just a domestic affair. It had ripple effects across the globe, like that time you accidentally dropped your phone in the toilet and the Wi-Fi went out in your entire apartment building.
His America First policies and unpredictable behavior shook up the global order, leaving allies feeling abandoned and adversaries emboldened. He pulled the U.S. out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade agreement, questioned the value of NATO, and cozied up to authoritarian leaders.
Trump's decision to withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord was a major blow to global efforts to combat climate change, and his administration's skepticism of multilateralism and international institutions like the United Nations and the World Trade Organization further eroded the rules-based international order that had been in place since World War II.
It was like someone had tossed a grenade into a crowded swimming pool. Everyone got wet, some people got hurt, and nobody was quite sure what to do next. Section 9. International institutions under strain. Remember those international institutions we just talked about? Yeah, those guys didn't have a great time under Trump either. It's like inviting a bull into a china shop and then being surprised when things get broken.
Trump was openly disdainful of organizations like the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, and NATO, viewing them as inefficient, bureaucratic, and generally opposed to American interests. He withdrew the U.S. from the UN Human Rights Council, the Paris Climate Accord, and the Iran nuclear deal. He also launched a trade war with China, imposed tariffs on goods from allies like Canada and the European Union, and threatened to pull the U.S. out of the World Trade Organization altogether.
His administration also slashed funding for foreign aid and diplomacy, further weakening U.S. influence on the world stage. Trump's approach to international institutions was like trying to fix a flat tire by letting all the air out of the other three tires. It might seem like a good idea at the time, but it's not going to get you very far. Section 10. A legacy of disruption. So, what's the lasting legacy of Trump's presidency on international relations? Well, it's probably too early to say for sure, but one thing's for certain: he left a mark. And by mark, I mean a giant, orange, spray-painted Trump on the side of the world stage. He upended decades of U.S. foreign policy, alienated allies, emboldened adversaries, and generally left the global order in a state of disarray. His presidency was a wake-up call, a reminder that the world is a messy, complicated place, and that even the most powerful country in the world can't always get what it wants. Whether you loved him or hated him, there's no denying that Donald Trump was a transformative figure in international politics. His presidency may be over, but its impact will continue to be felt for years to come. And now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go find a very large glass of wine.